Welcome to Tokunbo. My name is Jola Naibi, and in this limited podcast series, I'll be having conversations with Nigerian storytellers living in the diaspora. We will talk about the stories they tell, the way the stories are told, the way the stories are received, and so much more. Welcome to Tokunbo.
That we belong to a tradition of storytelling that began before there were books.
That's Sefi Atta, and she's my guest on this week's episode of Tokunbo. So, Sefi Atta, welcome to the podcast. I'm glad that you were able to make time for us in your very busy schedule. I'm going to get right to it. So, we'll kick off the conversation by going back to the beginning, if that's okay with you. So you're a writer, playwright, and I dare say academic. You've written numerous books and plays, including Every Good Thing Will Come, A Bit of Difference, The Bead Collector, and Swallow, which was adapted for the screen by Kunle Afolayan. And we'll talk about Swallow a little bit later in our conversation. But I read that your writing journey started when you decided to take classes at New York University. But before that, you had, shall I say, cut your teeth as a dramatist when you were the head of the drama club at Queen's College, Lagos. Tell us a little bit about that journey that led to you transitioning from an accounting career to a writing career.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here, Jola. And I am busy, but I'm sure that you're just as busy as I am. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think my journey started even before Queen's College. I was a chronic daydreamer when I was a girl. I had a playful mind, which apparently is necessary for the development of creativity. Mm. I also loved to read, and that helped. A family that read. My father loved books. My mother loved books. So my father loved the classics. Mm. And so we had a library of them. I remember being very young and trying to read Tom Sawyer, and I just didn't understand the dialect. But that's how much he expected of us as kids. And I told him, I said, I don't understand what they're saying. But I can't understand what I'm reading. So my mom was more into paperback novels. And then I had an elder sister who was into the detective novels. So was my brother. So we always had books of all kinds at home. And apparently that helps as well when you start writing. But, many children had the same habits that I had, the daydreaming, the reading, and they didn't become writers. So, and I always say I never wanted to become a writer. I just had stories. I got more comfortable with the title. But to be very honest, I still feel the same way. I just have stories I need to tell. So I often refer to myself as a storyteller because I don't know. I haven't looked back that far in my history. But I'm sure there was somebody in my family who just couldn't stop, who was a storyteller, who walked around whatever village there was telling. And I feel that way about the works I've done so far. I'm just doing the same, but except I'm setting my stories mostly in Lagos and other places I've lived, as in Nigeria. And the QC part was, by the time I got to QC, I don't know what led me. I think probably just because we put on a lot of plays at home, plays and musicals and all sorts of things. Okay. We just entertain ourselves. And back in the day, there was no television in the daytime. So you're outside playing, neighborhood, riding bicycles. We had a little playhouse where, by the way, I first learned how to smoke. I was 6 years old. In those days, parents just used to leave their children.
Yeah, the adventures were limitless, good and bad. Yeah.
I remember the playhouse, and oh my God, we had a neighbor. I won't even say his first or last name, and he would bring cigarettes from his father, who and that's where I learned how to smoke. Wow. 6 years old. I remember running back into the house, and my mom happened to be coming out of the kitchen, And she said, I've been smoking. This is to a 6-year-old child.
Oh
I
my
said,
goodness.
no. And then I went and I brushed my teeth and I went back to the house. But that's how it was in those days, where parents just used to let their children wander. Where was I? Oh, the Queen's College one. I continued to, I was just in the habit of putting on plays.
Okay.
So I continued to do that at Queen's College. I enjoyed it very much. You know, I found out in my 3rd year that there was a club or society, the drama club or society. I think we called it something society, theatre society, which sounds posher. But I remember reviving it and feeling that that was an important thing to do. There were seniors who were just better at everything.
Okay.
And I didn't care because I was keen, you know, and I had like a few friends who were keen as well. There was Itwen Bassi, who's a major designer, fashion designer now. She used to do our costumes back then.
Wow.
And take part in fashion shows. And so I see where all her influence comes from. And there was Toyo Olushola, whose mother, Elsie Olushola, was a soap in Village Headmaster.
Yeah.
Her father was, I think her father was a producer. Anyway, but she was involved. So it was 3 of us. And I don't know how I somehow became president, but I was really pleased because it was my idea. I think Itwen was the vice president. To be honest with you, I don't remember, but I took it very seriously. You know, casting, you know, the people in the actors and doing the PR for it, going from dorm to dorm with a handwritten notes to say we're doing this at certain time in the assembly hall. We had a wonderful assembly hall with a real stage and backstage with showers. Everything was amazing, and now it's been turned into a library, which is just as good. But that's the actual design of that stage was amazing. We had the velvet curtains, everything, you know. Anyway, but I talk a lot, and you took me back to Queen's College. I loved it.
Yeah, and it sounds like it was a very magical time. Clearly, the formative years that you spent in Nigeria, growing up in Lagos specifically, you can even tell in your stories how much of an impact it had on you. But coming back to the present time, now you're living away from Lagos. How easy or difficult is it for you to conjure the images of Lagos while living in the diaspora in order for you to tell a coherent story? Do you just tap into the nostalgia of the time? I mean, just hearing you talk about that time, you can tell that it's a time that, you know, had a major impact on you, even now as an adult. So how do you conjure up those images in order to be able to tell the stories that you've told in Everything Good Will Come, News from Home, the short stories?
It's not too hard, but I use my imagination as well. I never had a friend like Sherry living next to me. The people who lived next to me were this guy, who was, I think he was sent to remand home back for doing something. I don't know what it was eventually. And our other neighbors were called the queers. I still see them, a brother and sister. And had no neighbors like the Baccaris or Sherry. It's very easy because as a daydreamer, I'm still a chronic daydreamer. And my daydreams about shaping whatever happens in reality in ways that please me, you know, or in ways that interest me. I didn't write about any of my neighbors, who were an interesting bunch. We really had a wonderful group of kids. It was a magical time, and it's easy for me to pull on that or draw on that, should I say, in my writings. But it was also a difficult time because we're going through the war, and we were far away from the war front. But we had neighbors who were evil. And I just think about Adora in Nolly. I think I bumped into Nolly somewhere in DC. Was it Adora? I can't remember. But it was one of them. And they must have been going through a lot, you know? So it was a complicated time in Nigeria, but also so much rich history to pull from. And coming from a family where I had relatives who were directly impacted or impacted, by the way, and also somehow involved with the leaders of the time. It all sort of converged together.
Yeah, I remember reading, sorry to interrupt, somewhere that your aunt was married to Christopher Okibo.
She was, and my cousin Obi, was their only child. And I grew up, Obi was one of my buddies when I was growing up. And what else? My aunt, I have an aunt, Rikia, who's just an incredible character, who was a confidant to the Sadhana at that time. And, just family history. And then, of course, the family I married into, the Ransakuti family, also has history in Nigeria. So our family histories have also influenced me in my writing. I remember somebody was saying about one of my novels that, oh, but you're drawing so much on history. I said, yeah, because that's my background. I was in Queen's College. I was in class with General Muritala Mohammed's daughter, Aisha.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I went off to boarding school in England, I was classmates with General Adekunle's daughter and General Adebayo's daughter. So everybody I knew had some kind of history
connected to
Nigeria.
Yeah.
That's just the way it was. And it's the way I write. I'm very interested in history. But QC played a part as well. I love drama so much that I almost failed my third year. I just managed to scrape through, got into trouble at home. And for the first time, I realized, when you're in school, you have to study. And my next year, I came first in class, and I wasn't the brightest person. I just put in some effort into something else other than drama. Yeah. And then the NYU thing, yes, that was so. I had just had my child. We were living in the town called Hackensack. It was a city, I don't know, Hackensack, New Jersey. I was working in New York, and I came across a brochure of New York University and read it, and I thought, this is something I'd like to do. Taking the classes, I think it was every weekend, and it was my me time. I'd done a lot in that year. I'd had a child. I'd studied for exams and passed them. I needed some time for myself, doing something that just for me. That was just for me.
And the world is better for it. So we're so glad that you picked up that brochure and it kind of kindled the writing spirit in you. But still on that, I wondered, are there any particular challenges that you face as a Nigerian writer in the diaspora, especially when addressing global audiences who may have a limited understanding of Nigerian culture and history? I guess a simpler way to ask the question is, what was the road to publication like for you with your first book, Every Good Thing Will Come? And how was it received in the global, not so much the reading audience, but in terms of the gatekeepers to the publishing industry? Were they able to open up themselves to the fact that you're telling an authentic story of your life without those stereotypes that often trail us as Nigerians when we choose to live abroad?
Well, I think you know the answer to that, Jola.
No, but I want to hear it from you. And I think our audience also want to hear it from you.
For me, I think, obviously I've talked about it in the past, but the way I feel now, I really don't care. I started telling stories with an audience in mind. And I remember being on my MFA course, and the teacher asked us, or lecturer asked us that question, who do you write for? And I said, for an audience, for readers. I have readers in mind. And everyone else in the class said they wrote for themselves. And I thought, oh, that's an odd thing. That's an odd thing. It's also, I think, a very Western idea. Because I'm coming from that long tradition of storytelling where people went to the village square and spoke to people. So I have an idea of a global audience, but I have to say it's an audience that probably is fairly cosmopolitan, which has been my experience. Only to find out that the publishing industry really had a lot, they had to catch up.
They're still catching up.
In the literary capital of like London, and well, London's not too bad, but they still expected us to write those post-colonial traumatic stories. And here in America, it's any kind of human rights story, as a professor I met at where was it? How's it? Writer in residence. I can't remember the name. It's very well-known university in Chicago, and he said he and he's a white American. He said, he basically said, in an African novel, leg must cut, and I almost died laughing. He traveled to South Africa, and I understood exactly the way he expressed himself like in Nigeria. And I said, yes, leg must cut. There must be some disaster, and with everything come, it took me 7 years, and I remember my agent, who I met just the day before we moved to Mississippi, and was always there, very nice. We had a good relationship, telling me that one of the agents that she works with said, "Oh, I have no idea what," he's an Englishman, by the way, "I have no idea what Nigeria, what Lagos looks like." And she gave me more description. I think surely you can Google or whatever it is that was available at the time. And he was apparently well traveled and he'd been to Kenya. I swear to God, some of the things we have to deal with. Anyway, and so I begrudgingly did that because I knew I had to add some descriptions. It's something I'm not very good at. And I just don't really, whenever people give too many descriptions, I just skip through it because I can't be bothered. Unless it's well done. And so I said, let me approach this from a different way. And then I began to think of interesting ways to describe Lagos. So it's added to the book in the end. And I've always been thankful to her for sharing that with me, regardless of what it meant at the time. Now we have so many more Nigerian writers.
Exactly.
More accustomed. I still think to some degree that the gatekeepers always select the stories they want to read.
Yes. And there's always an overwhelming bias to trauma. The trauma
there is. And I do think that writers pay attention to that because they need to be published. They need to get their works. But I've been with the same publisher for many years.
Okay.
And, my publisher he pretty much publishes everything I write, which is wonderful. And they've never interfered with my creative process. So, which is good. How do I feel about it now? I learned very early in my writing life that people were just undereducated.
Yes.
About what our lives were like in Nigeria. And I remember that was about the time that book, What is the Word, came out. I can't remember where in my writing life came out, but that's what they wanted, the war stories, the child soldiers. How on earth would a girl like me, who pretty much grew up in the suburbs of Lagos, write a story like that? And I try to move out of that environment I've grown up in and write about others. But I always had a connection to them. I always had some connection to them. I didn't just, and I would walk around those neighborhoods and, figure out what was going on. I didn't just do it for entertainment or for Western readers. Now I'm just kind of bored with the whole, I'm 61 this year. I've been doing this, I've been writing since I was 30 and full-time since I was 33, mostly in Mississippi. And so I'm not really that connected. I'm also with a small press. I'm not that connected to the publishing industry and what they do. And I can't be bothered.
And there is an element of relief in that because once you get into the weeds, there's no coming out. And I mean, still on that topic, we can both agree that Nigerian writers or marginalized writers, if you may, are not operating from a place of power. The power dynamics are different. But that being said, I mean, if you think about writing as activism and the pen as a sword, so to speak, sorry to insert violence into it, but I can't at this point, what role do you think Nigerian writers in the diaspora have in what role can they play in shaping the global perceptions of the country? I mean, how do you balance? I like what you say, because you're telling authentic stories based on your life living in the suburbs of Lagos. But how do you balance portraying authentic Nigerian experiences while challenging those stereotypes that not everybody is a child soldier, not everybody has some trauma that's driven them?
Well, I think, with writing, there's always conflict, and there were conflicts in the suburbs.
Yes, there were people, men that had second families, and yeah.
And perhaps they resemble what happens in the suburbs here too much. But I've never resented an American writer for writing those stories about their parents' divorce or whatever it is. So why can't I tell those stories? It takes away from your humanity. I don't think it's up to me to tell people do you write whatever you want to write. Be the kind of writer that you want to be. Define that at the beginning and carry on how you wish. Change if you want to. That's the way I feel now. I mean, at first I couldn't understand it, but at 61, I honestly, I feel that people should just do. Oh boy, someone's calling me. I won't answer. I just do what I want to do. And that is continue to tell the stories that speak to me. Can you hear the buzzing of my phone?
No, I can't. But if you can, this is a conversation. And the way I have this podcast conversations done, it's almost like I want the audience to feel like they're eavesdropping on a conversation that Jola Naibi is having with Sefi Atta. So I want it to be as natural as possible, even if a car zooms by or anything. That's the natural. I'm not in a studio on my dining table in my house. But
I am at the dining table in my house.
You see, so one dining table to the other.
You said you wanted audio, and right now I prepared for audio, which means I got up and I had a shower and I came here in my sweats.
I love it. That's the way it's supposed, because I'm not a fan of formality, because I think it removes some of the authenticity from conversations that we're having like this. I wanted to just say on topic.
Sorry for that. It does, but you must understand that someone like me, I'm extremely absent-minded, and if you start me off somewhere with a prompt, it can lead you to places that you won't believe.
Which is the beauty of having these sorts of conversations. So, is it fair to say that most of the writing that you do about the Nigerian experience happens while you're living outside of Nigeria? And do you find, and you've talked very, warmly about your time, living in the Lagos suburbs. Do you find that the distance helps you see the country more clearly, or does it create a sense of disconnection? I asked you earlier about how you immerse yourself in the story, and you talked about still being a daydreamer, which is a good element. But the distance in terms of not having lived in Nigeria, not presently living in Nigeria, does it make you see it more clearly, or do you feel a little bit disconnected?
Not at all. So I go to Nigeria at least twice a year.
Okay,
I have a home there, and and so I am connected to Nigeria. Not like it's not like living there every single day. And to be honest with you, I probably find it very hard to write there. I have written there before, but only plays and I've revised novels, but I've never drafted a novel from scratch. I wouldn't even know where to go and find paper, to be honest with you, because when I'm there, I look for food. But no, the distance does help, the spatial as well as whatever the word is for distance and time, which I can't remember now. Anyway, but so that does, wherever I am, I will always remember my childhood till my father died. My father died when I was 8.
Okay.
And that was, again, I dealt with that in a magical fashion. I just imagined that he was on a special mission on the moon. And I will eventually see him. And it helped me through that time. And, it does help, yeah. And what I need to research, I research. And what I need to imagine, I imagine. So nothing is autobiographical the way people think it is. And I find it a little curious that people do not understand that writers have imagination. That's another thing about the gatekeepers. They always think you're writing about yourself. Like someone asked me, was your mother depressed? Which what is wrong?
I don't know where this element of negativity.
What is wrong?
So,
and why would I even write about my mom? It's so weird.
It's
and
exhausting.
As a Yoruba girl, I'm kind of respectful of her space. Obviously, believe it or not, the father and everything will come. That was my mother's voice.
The father.
That was my mother's voice. Because my father died when I was young, so I didn't have anything to draw. I remember going for a BBC interview for the book, and I started reading the beginning when I said, "Editor, come and help him here." And the I don't even know what they were. I suppose they were the producers who were doing the sound and everything. Kept saying, we want her to speak like her. And I was saying, this is how my mother speaks. How do you think my mother speaks? And they made me repeat that thing. I'll never forget. I really enjoyed being with the presenter, who I thought was very respectful and nice to me. She knew I was nervous. But these couple of men who just kept interrupting and saying, "Oh, we just need her to speak." And they never said it, but what they wanted was an African accent that they had heard.
And it's so sad. Yeah, the way they compartmentalize us. Am I saying that right? But and they want you to be a certain flavor, and that's the only flavor that's.
It was more than that. They were actually angry with me. I could tell in their body language, in everything, that they were getting frustrated with me. And I'm supposed to talk. A woman who left Nigeria by boat to go to England to be trained and return back to Nigeria. What is she supposed to sound like? And if she did sound like that, trust me, I would have used that voice. But I knew this woman I was writing about, and I knew how she would sound. They didn't believe me.
I mean, well, congratulations to you for standing your ground. And that's where the whole power dynamics comes from, when you have somebody who doesn't understand your culture but thinks your culture should be a certain way, and then they want you to kind of make sure you define or portray your culture in a way that's so inauthentic, so different from what it is. But I wanted to take the conversation in a different direction now, because I've read most, if not all, of your books. I haven't engaged as much with your plays, but I read somewhere that of all the genres that you create in short stories, the longer prose, and plays, you prefer playwriting, and that's your first love. Is that correct? And if yes, what is it about writing plays that brings out the creativity in you?
Right. Well, maybe it's just something I always thought I was when I was young, a playwright. I was also studying Shakespeare at that time when I was writing a lot and enjoying Shakespeare's works. And believe it or not, I don't know why, because the English was hard to understand.
Yeah,
but the drama was there. I was at Beth at Queens, and it reminded me very much of the cruise we were having, the bloody cruise we were having in Nigeria. Anyway, it's a hard one. I would say that the sheer number of words you have to write in a book means that it is more difficult to write one. I prefer to write scripts because of that. It just makes it more tedious to write, and I also have to immerse myself in a novel for longer periods of time to draft them. And the day takes longer, so it gets more enjoyable as you go on. But I do write books. I've written more books. Well, not so much. I've written a lot more plays than I have books, but I write books. So getting them published, it's easier than getting scripts produced. And that's why I end up writing them. It's harder to get a script produced, whether it's a screenplay or. I've also written a lot of screenplays on the quiet, and I've been in talks with a few of the major producers in Lagos that approached me to work with me on different projects. Kule Afolayan was the first to make it work.
Yes, and which brings me to my next question. So your novel was Swallow, brilliant novel, was adapted for the screen as a Netflix movie. How did that happen? What was the process? Did I read correctly that you wrote the screenplay?
Well, we worked on it together.
Okay. All right. So what happened first? Did you have the idea to make Swallow into a movie, or were you approached by the producers that we would like to make your book into a movie?
Well, it started off, as I told you, I've been working on screenplays on the quiet, and one of them placed in a fairly major competition, the Zoetrope one. That the final judge is Francis Ford Coppola. And so that gave me confidence when Kunle Afolayo approached me. However, I wasn't sure that, you're never too sure. You're as good as your last screenplay, to be honest with you. And I wasn't sure that I could pull it off, but we both worked on this. It took him a while to even claim credit. Did I tell you that? Or am I repeating myself?
No, you haven't. You said he approached you.
Yeah, he approached me. And of course, I was very keen to do something because I've been working on him. And he gave me the confidence. It took him a while to accept credit. But when he kept working on the story and changing things, I said, look, you're writing it as much as I am. The co-writers on this. Anyway, and then he signed a deal with Netflix, which was fantastic. And I had to stay focused on developing the script with him, and with the collaboration, writers have to give up full control.
Yeah.
In the interest of harmony. It's his film, but it does help to work with a partner who understands storytelling. So he'd come up with an idea and let me think about it overnight. And then he had been in the business for as long as I had, in the business of storytelling. So we had mutual respect. And the novel was obviously about the mother's journey as well. It's two narrators in that story.
Yes.
And we couldn't concentrate on the mother because that would be a TV series. He had a deal for a film. So we had to make it just about the daughter, Tolani herself. When I finished, I pretty much let it go. I wasn't involved in the edits or the production or anything.
Okay. Or the casting.
Nothing. He wanted me to be home, but there was COVID and I just didn't feel like traveling.
I mean, that's an interesting journey. And I think my next question is a bit of a personal one, but would you like to see more collaboration between the Nigerian literary community at home and abroad and the Nigerian film industry?
That's an interesting one. I'm relatively new to the industry, although I've worked, as I said, and had discussions with a lot of main well-known producers and directors that we have. A couple of people wanted to turn everything good come into a film, and I said it was not good to adapt because there were too many decades and having child actors never works. All these kind of things. So, and I followed the progression of Nollywood for years. There is a lot of talent, and the word that you mentioned, collaborate, is key. I don't think we know how to collaborate. People want to impose their ideas on everyone. Which is not a good thing. Because I'm telling you, through collaboration, you get better writers, you get better directors, better everything.
Exactly.
They aren't always in the right roles, by the way. We have writers, producers, actors, and directors who aren't as skilled as they should be at what they do.
I've seen, there's some actors who should not be writing scripts, but they have a powerful presence. That's just my own personal opinion.
Look, I follow Nollywood and I'm a fan, but I just know why when things go wrong, things went wrong. We have script readers who can't recognize good writing from bad.
Yes, and I was listening to another podcast, and the name escapes me, but one of the things that she said, which hit the nail on the head, that it's clear when you're watching a movie that's been written so badly that you know that this person has not engaged with literature at the level where they need to with other writing. And again, I wanted to also pause and say that I understand the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into a creative work. And this isn't any indictment on anyone whatsoever. I guess everybody's standard of receiving quality standard of quality is different. But I guess I was super excited, having read your book, to see that it was adapted for a movie. And one of the things that I was also excited when having this conversation with you was to see how that journey went. And the way you described it, I don't know if there will be any collaboration in the future, but I think it needs to be done right. Would you agree with me? Or
Definitely, and that's why I haven't said yes to everything.
mm.
Without being antagonistic. I just will say to them, I'm not the right person for this project. I'm not the right person you need to be working with. And he said something that after I thought, I can't remember what it was now. I think it was something about, you see how when you recognize what's going wrong with a film, I recognize when a writer hasn't written whatever is being said, because it's not in line with what they did before. I can just figure out when someone, the producer or someone, got involved, the director, and wrote a line that's just not something that the writer would write. Took the story in a direction. So I'm more sort of sensitive to the dialogue and how it can take a turn that I know that the writer would never, if they are a half competent writer. So that's why the standards are not consistent, but they're getting better, and it's always great to see ourselves on screen.
Yes. It's interesting that you said that, because everything that goes into the publishing industry. I had a different conversation with a different writer as part of this series, and one of the things that we both agreed on was that you can tell when a Nigerian/African writer's work has gone through a Western editor's hands.
Oh, really?
And the reason I say that is when you see certain things translated, and the example I think I gave during that conversation was when they're calling Ewa Agoyin being put in. And for me, it's not anything I ever heard.
Jola, I think that's, to be honest with you, that's a very small concession.
Yeah, and
I'll tell you why. People make it.
Let's have this.
I'll tell you why. Because you'd be surprised that people in Egypt don't know what Agoyin is.
Okay.
You understand? I don't know why we always think it's about Westerners. If you're thinking of an African audience, we don't all speak the same language.
No, we don't.
Can you tell me what?
I agree with you, because even somebody in Kenya, which is closer than Egypt, will probably not know what Agoyin is. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is that in telling our stories, what level of authenticity do we want? And I guess it's also personal, because I come from a culture of Ewa Agoyin, and seeing it translated as being put in just kind of dilutes the authenticity. And so how do we take control of the narrative in order to counter kind of prevailing biases, if you want?
It may have been the writer herself or himself who thought about how to.
It is, and that was just one example. Others are.
That shouldn't make you more angry than. I mean, where do you draw the line? We have words in italics. We're taking them out now.
Yes.
We have, we all what spaghetti is, because we were introduced to Western culture from a very young age. But they, I think about other Africans rather than Westerners whenever I write these stories. About the fact that they may not even know what Eba is or whatever it is. For some people, it's a big deal. For me, the authenticity of the story is more important. And whether you chose to have one word or the other, or, people sometimes write in Yoruba or whatever the language is. If I can't speak your language, I don't know what you're writing. I just skip over that part. Like that. Whether it's Spanish or German or anything, I'll skip over that part. And if you are sensitive to readers, you might think differently about it. I don't think that's a major thing. And the power dynamic, I think it depends just how much you want to be recognized or to be acknowledged. And I think for every writer is different. For me, honestly, at this stage, I write a book. By the time I've written a book, I'm working on another.
Yeah.
I have one coming out in June, and I'm already working on another. I'm knee deep trying to make my way through another as usual. So for start, I've forgotten the characters. And unless my publisher says, "Oh, someone's reviewed it," and I ask, "Was it good? Was it bad?" I get someone else to read it. It was fairly good. I might read it. I might not. I've moved on. So you can take your power back. You don't have to worry about the gatekeepers, whoever it is. I can easily say that, and I'm hesitant because it's easy for me to say that after so many years of writing. But I understand people who have to hustle harder. I do understand it. And that's why I don't blame anyone. Just do whatever is necessary for you. I started writing because I had stories to tell, and that's what will continue to motivate me. The visibility and the rest of it. No.
And I like what you said, Hassan. It's almost like an assembly line for you. Okay, done with this one. What's next? How do you keep those creative fires burning where you always have a project that you're working on? Just as you're finishing one, you're starting another one. What does it for you?
Oh, goodness. I have so many stories. And I can tell. And I've had to be more. I first of all wrote what I had to write. I needed to write. Then I started writing what I wanted to write.
That's interesting.
And that, I've never run short of stories. The only thing I don't do is I don't write poetry, I don't write nonfiction. I don't write nonfiction because I don't want people calling me saying, "But why did you say this? Why did And I respect people's privacy. So I'm scared to write nonfiction. I write it very badly. But when it comes to fiction, it never stops. In fact, I've told myself and my family, this is my last year. I'm not doing this anymore. I don't want to spend the rest of my life sitting in a room and writing. I used to be motivated by life experiences and what I heard, what I saw. And now I'm motivated by life itself rather than writing about it. Being present, whether I'm at home or traveling or celebrating some event. We're off to a wedding quite soon. And it may not seem like much to most people, but as I said, if you spend most of 30 years sitting in a room, and you spent your time with imaginary characters and your thoughts are usually with them, being present is a big deal, So, I'm not short of inspiration and motivation. I've worked very hard, as a lot of writers do. Didn't even take time to celebrate.
Yes, and it's funny, you've taken the conversation in a direction that I hadn't anticipated, but you've talked about how solitary the writing experience is. And this is one of the reasons why I decided to have this podcast series, because just knowing the loneliness of writing, and before everyone sees your work, it's you and your cursor or your pen, depending on how you start it. And just knowing that there are other people out there doing the same thing in their little cubicles or wherever it is, does that give you any motivation? Or what motivates you in the lonely experience, in the solitary experience of writing? Are you thinking about fellow writers doing the same thing, or are you thinking about the audience?
No. And I don't really have a community of writers around me. The writers I know, I consider them my colleagues. And some of them I like very much as I do my friends, and some of them I really don't. Either way we're professional. And what motivates me? I'm not lonely though. As I said, I'm always with characters. I dream about them. They become real to me. I would repeat a story to just say some dialogue or whatever it is to my husband, and I'll be laughing, and he'll be staring at me like, "Okay, what are you talking about?" And because I'm always around imaginary people, the loneliness I think is It's not that long, to be honest with you. I just now prefer to be real people.
Got it.
And so my motivation comes from, first of all, I'm extremely professional. Extremely so. And that's because of my training as an accountant. For years, I worked as an accountant and trained as one. And so if I say I'm going to have something done, I will get it done. If it can't be done, I will say, oh, listen, I need more time. I submit on time. I do whatever I have to do on time. I have very little patience for writers who don't get things done on time and who are just over emotional or whatever it is. I'm that way with my students as well, who have some interest in writing. Some of them want to be writers. I tell them, listen, if I ask for an assignment, you don't send it in on time. It's disrespectful. You know, make sure you send it, because in the real world, nobody will pay you. They just throw your manuscript to one side.
Yeah.
Time to start, So I tell them that. My goodness, I think I've gone on as usual.
No,
I warned you about that, and
like I said, this is a conversation that can go in so many different directions. Remember, I really am not a huge fan of formality, especially for something like this. I'm asking all my guests this question: What do you miss most about Nigeria?
Food. Not quite the same here. I love to eat.
Yeah.
I was telling someone else saying something like, if I had a propensity to gain weight, I'll be huge right now. I don't eat much, but I just love to eat. I'm constantly eating, and I enjoy the food back home.
Yeah.
I enjoy the fact that someone else gets to cook it for me. Right. And what else? My husband's a lot more sociable than I am. So I get to go to a lot of places with him. And then I remember, oh my goodness, so nice to be out and see old friends. If you've been in your head a lot, you have to socialize yourself. Sometimes you don't even know how to respond to ordinary greetings like, hello, how are you? Or whatever it is. And, I enjoy being with old friends, especially. I write about my generation of Nigerian. My generation of Nigerians.
Yeah, and it's quite an interesting generation.
Oh man,
yeah.
And I hate to use American terms to describe us or Western terms, but we were the all boomers. Sorry, I call us the all boomers, but we were the boomers, the end of the boomer, and beginning of the X. Those 1960s babies. And we just really don't show up in literature.
It's and it almost seems as if something bad has to be happening when you show up, and they can't accept that kids riding on their bikes and running around, and like you said, playing in your family shared, having the good and the bad experiences that you had. We're coming close to the end of our conversation.
Oh, okay.
And I wanted to ask you to what should we expect from you next? I read in the trades, in the journals, that you have a book coming out this year.
Well, last year I had a young adult novel, Good for Nothing Girl.
Good for Nothing Girl, yes.
And now it's published in November. They're very short books. I wrote them during COVID.
Okay.
And Good for Nothing Girl is the story of a girl who comes to the US to further her education. And then she finds herself caught up in a case of modern day slavery, but against her own will. So they are calling her, they're saying she's been trafficked, and she's been saying, no, I came here for my education and things went a little wrong. So she's a difficult victim. Constantly telling Americans that, nah, you're not going to label me that and call my story that. And my next one is Indigene. It's a novella, and it's a return to the characters of Everything Good Will Come. But I also have it with a few short stories that have been published before, and they're all about Nigerian women who are crossroads in their lives, and that should be coming out in June.
In June, okay. And it's funny you said in Indigene we're meeting characters that we've read in. Is it Everything Good Will Come?
Anytime. Sherry doesn't show up as much as she in everything, and it was, we're revisiting characters that we saw, her dad and other people.
And what was that process, the writing process, like for you? These are characters that we first met 25 years ago. What was it like revisiting, re-engaging with them? Is it something that you like to do?
No.
I like to call it recycling your characters.
No.
No?
I don't know why I did it. I don't know why I did it. And I'll never do it again. Because usually when I finish a novel, I've said goodbye to my characters. I have no desire to see them again.
Mm-hmm.
But Nigeria, we were going through a lot in the time that I set the novel.
Yeah.
2020, COVID, there was what happened in Lekki and other places.
Okay.
You know, and this was before any of that happened, before COVID and before the, what's the name of it? The NSAS protests in Nigeria. And I have a lot to say as a Nigerian. And I thought I could create new characters for this story. But it wouldn't be interesting if I went back to the characters I've already become to write about. It was very difficult. And the story itself was challenging. Very depressing too. I don't like to use the word depressing, but sad. It made me sad to write that story. But I'm glad that I wrote it now, not because of any. I see the stories that I raised coming up again and again and again. And so I'm glad that I got them out of my system, because I don't know where I'd be. I'd just be so frustrated now with what's going on. Yeah, if I hadn't written about it.
And we talked about this a little bit throughout this conversation, but I just wanted to end with it. You have the Nigerian writer in the diaspora wanting to write about their heritage, while navigating different complexities. What advice would you give them?
Well, we began with one, which is just define what kind of writer you want to be and go with it. That's fine. We have the right to decide. God, apart from the usuals of reading and writing every day, I can't think of any. But I think I mentioned, retaining your power, certainly taking it back. Mm-hmm. That doesn't work for everyone. I think people should also remember, if they can, and I hate to be preachy, maybe I should just give myself this advice, or share the advice I gave myself, that we belong to a tradition of storytelling that began before there were books.
Yes.
This whole idea of telling we must tell our stories. What do people mean when they say that? We've been doing that for centuries. It's how we survived, yeah. And to make statements like that is to negate the efforts of so many people who started telling stories. Before we had to answer to some publishing industry where we have books and agents and editors and awards and lists and whatever it is, the ways in which Western capitalism changes storytelling for us. And if they can remember that, which is what I told myself, you always stay on the right path. And you needn't worry about an industry that started long after your tradition began.
Yeah. And your tradition definitely supersedes that. These are powerful words, Sefi Atta. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for the stories that you tell, the characters that you've created, and for your contribution to the Nigerian literary world. It has been such an amazing pleasure talking to you. Any last words before we end our conversation?
No, except to say thank you so much for having me here. And I hope you have a wonderful writing life.
Thank you. And we look forward to Indigene, June 2025.
Yeah, it's my most radical book.
Most radical book?
Yeah, I wrote it as a protest.
That's good. That's good to know. Thank you, Sefi Atta. Be well.
I will be. Thank you, and stay well.
All right. Take care. Bye. I really like the way Sefi reminds us that a playful, daydreaming mind is necessary for creativity. There is a benefit to listening to the voices in your head, the images that play as a showreel in your mind, and all the elements that can serve as a platform for the creative process. I also like one of the powerful things that she said during our conversation, how she started by writing what she had to write and needed to write before transitioning into what she wanted to write. And the world is better for that. Thank you so much for listening. And on the final episode of Tokunbo.
So I realized that, okay, in my own way, what can I do to add to the existence of more well-written Yoruba texts on the internet? And one of the ways I thought I could do that was to translate work from English into Yoruba, from writers I respect, from stories I like. I was actually thinking of doing a whole collection of translated work of the writers I've read.